It means the inside of the body or the environment inside the body, it has to be kept constant. But what are the components that we need to keep them constant? The first component is water. It has to be kept constant. We have to keep the temperature constant. We have to keep the blood glucose constant. These are the main three things that have to be kept constant in our body. The amount of water in the tissue fluids, they have to remain constant. Why بقى? Because as we know that the tissue fluid is a component of plasma. This must not be very or too much or very little in amount. The temperature, of course, because of the enzymes, it has to remain constant. The blood glucose has to remain constant, and why I'm going to explain بقى later. على blood glucose كده عندها جزء لوحده كده. Now, what are the parts of the body that are responsible for these homeostatic mechanisms or homeostasis? We have طبعا above all the nervous system. We have, as I explained before, the endocrine system. What's meant by endocrine system, ya Veronica? What's the meaning of endocrine system? It's made of what?
It's the glands and the
Yes, of course. Thank you, Abdurrahman. Thank you, Veronica.
And
Glands, yes.
glands.
Very good, very good. Thank you. Ductless glands, excellent, Chikanzi. Bravo. Also, the liver. Okay, we have the pancreas. Glands, بس طبعا البنكرياس هنا I'm going to explain something about its endocrine function, not producing pancreatic juice. And we have the skin. All these, they share in homeostasis, or keeping the internal environment constant. But why do we need the internal environment to remain constant? For several reasons. Because if the internal environment remained constant, so the cells will work properly. Also for the enzymes, as I just said, because each enzyme has its own optimum temperature at which they are going to work with their maximum activity. And of course, because I'm speaking about humans, يبقى عندي طبعا around 37. الplants بتبقى من 25 to 28. كمان, in order to be sure that the cells are not damaged, طيب, can you tell me, يا كنزي, which part has to be constant so the cells will not be damaged? Water ولا temperature ولا blood glucose? ايه رأيك؟
water.
طبعا برافو. لأن الووتر if حصل يعني low water amount in the body, so the cells, they are going to shrink because water will leave the cell by osmosis. If there is too much water, the cells will absorb too much water, they are going to burst, because these are animal cells and not plant cells. Nothing is protecting them. لا عندهم cell wall ولا vacuole. طيب, في كمان, this will ensure that there is a good reserve of glucose for respiration. We know that glucose acts as a fuel for respiration. If there is homeostasis, so these are the importance of benefits of homeostasis. But let me begin by the first homeostatic mechanism which is controlling temperature. This is called على فكرة يا جماعة thermoregulation. So if you saw this word in any question, you're going to know that this is regulation of temperature, because anything called thermal means heat or temperature. That's why they called it a thermometer. Right. Vertebrates, you know that we have classified them into 5 classes from chapter 1. الكلاس الأول اللي هو الفيش والamphibians like the frogs, the toads, salamanders, newt, and there are reptiles, there are birds, and mammals. Now, these animals, they cannot allow their body temperature to be constant. They are called ectothermic animals. Ectothermic, it means that their body heat or temperature is affected by the surroundings, something coming from outside their body. If the weather is cold, so the temperature of the blood will be cold. If the weather is hot, the temperature of the blood will be hot. But the birds and mammals, زي ما كانزي قالت من شوية, they are endothermic. It means that their internal temperature is kept constant. They are not affected by the temperature of the surroundings. For example, like human beings, we are mammals طبعا. If it is very cold, but we can still be active, our body temperature is kept at average بتاعنا 37. If it is very hot, if you measured your temperature, it's going to be around 37. Our body temperature is constant, and even if the temperature of the surrounding is changing. لكن الectothermic animals لا, they change their body temperature according to the temperature of the surroundings. If it is very hot, endothermic animals, they get their heat energy from the food and from respiration. That's why we eat more in winter than in summer. When it is very cold in winter, طبعا انتوا يمكن مش حاسين بده دلوقتي، لكن احنا عايشين فيه. In the winter بتبقى very cold, very cold. We have to eat more in order to increase our heat or increase metabolism and produce more heat in order to warm up the body. طب why do we have to be endothermic? What are the advantages of being endothermic? Endothermic, for طبعا the enzymes number 1 and number 100 for the enzymes. Also, in order to keep metabolism going on, because we need heat energy in order to make our chemical reactions inside our bodies. No matter what the temperature outside the body is, but the metabolism has to be going on. And metabolism goes on in endothermic animals. Also, in cold weather, we have to be active. So these are the benefits or the advantages of being endothermic. Right. How can the body keep the body or its temperature constant? I just told you that there are certain parts of the body that work on this. Let's go to the first organ, which is the skin, that shares or that helps decrease the body or increase the body temperature. The skin of mammals is a very important organ in temperature regulation. Now let me put this picture to the skin. Here it is. تتخضوش. This is طبعا حسب ما بيشوفوه باللايت مايكروسكوب. The skin of mammals, وخليني أقول of humans, is made of 2 layers. This layer, it is called the epidermis. Here are the words, it's clear. Epidermis. While this thicker layer is called the dermis. Epi means above. So if this is the dermis, then this is above the dermis, or epidermis type. As you can see, that there are structures in the epidermis and other structures in the dermis. The epidermis, if I want to describe it, I'm going to say that it is the top layer of the skin. And if you can see that it is formed of here a basement membrane like this, and all this area it is not good. طيب. Let me change the color. All this area is formed of cells. Can anybody tell me what's the name of these cells? These are called epithelial cells. I've waited for so long. طيب ما هو التيشو. What is the tissue made of? It is made of cells. فلما أقول إن كل ده epithelial tissue, it is made of cells. These are called epithelial cells that form the epithelial tissue. As you can see, that these cells, they are in layers. And these cells, if I draw the basement membrane اللي هو ده, هلاقي إن الcells, they arise from this basement membrane. It means that these cells, they are continuously dividing, and when a cell divides, or a group of cells divide, they are going to push the older ones to the top of or to the surface of the skin. The cells that are on the surface, they are dead cells. يعني these cells اللي هم on the surface, let me color them in black, they are dead cells. طب is this a good thing or a bad thing? It's a very good thing, because when these cells die, they contain keratin protein, and that's why it is called the cornified layer. It is not very, very soft as the cells inside. The cells inside, they are newly formed. They are not tough enough to withstand any kind of pressure, for example, on the skin. يعني دايما cells that are in the lower layers of the epidermis, they are still young cells that are not tough enough. A layer of the skin on the top, or the cells on top, they are tough layers. That's why tough cells. That's why we call them cornified, because they contain this protein, keratin. Is this keratin a good thing? Yes, of course, because it gives the skin, or allows the skin to be waterproof. This kind of protein, it lets the skin to be waterproof in order to protect the soft tissues, or the soft cells that are lying beneath. Also, they are always being worn away in order to renew this cornified layer. يعني they are always worn away. يعني for example, if you are washing your hands, you are shedding or getting out these dead cells. The next layer is going to be dead. يعني if I have here layers of cells, these are very new, these are older, these are older, and older and so on, until we have here the oldest cells that are forming the cornified layer because they are full of keratin. Now, when we wash our hands or we take a shower, or even if you made friction with anything beside you, so these cells are going to be shed. The next layer is going to be dead or cornified على طول. This means that the cells, they are going to decrease in number? No, because they are always renewed from below. هنا بقى بيبتدي ده يعمل again. البيزمنت membrane ده يبدأ يعمل again layers and layers of cells. Whenever a layer from above is shed off, there is another layer that is produced in the lowermost part of the epidermis. Cells of the skin, they are always renewed. That's why we have to clean our skin regularly in order to take away the cornified layer. Why do we want to take it away? Because it is full of dust, it is exposed to the air, it's full of dust, it's full of harmful bacteria, for example, that try to gain access to the inside of the body. Yes, there are useful bacteria, but they are going to grow once more, the useful ones. This cornified layer becomes thicker at our soles. What is the sole? It is the lower part of the underneath of our foot. Yani if you have, this is the foot, for example, so this is the sole of the foot. It is very thick here at the sole of the foot in order to withstand our pressure. طبعا in the soles cornified layer is worn out easily, and it is always replaced by cornified layer or renewed by more another cornified layer. Right. This is for this part of the epidermis. Look at this part. In this part, these are cells that produce a pigment which is called melanin. So if I erased all this, ولا خليني أحطها هنا. These cells produce something called melanin. But what is this melanin? It is a dark pigment. It is a dark pigment, and it is very important. It helps to absorb the harmful ultraviolet rays that would damage the skin. Yani, if there are light-colored skin people, they are affected more than the dark-skinned people by the ultraviolet rays. El melanin, when it increases, it gives more protection to people against ultraviolet rays, because this melanin absorbs the ultraviolet rays and prevents the damage of the skin. As you can see here, there is another thing in the dermis, in the epidermis. Look how it extends down through the dermis, and it is folded like this. These folds, they are called the hair follicle. Sometimes students to all hair root. No, it has a name, follicle. Don't ever say root, root of the hair. No, it is called the hair follicle, from which the hair arises, and the hair is formed of keratin as well. على فكرة الكeratin, it forms the skin, the upper layer of the skin, it forms our nails. Nails, these are made of keratin. Well, hair, all these are made of keratin protein. But what about the dermis بقى? Here, the dermis, it starts just below the epidermis, this dermis is very important because it is formed أولاً of connective tissue. From its name, what's the meaning of connective tissue? It means that this is a tissue that connects part of the body together. It connects the skin to the underlying tissues. الconnective tissue هنا بيبقى containing elastic fibers and collagen. Collagen, by the way, is a kind of protein. كمان elastic fibers دول عبارة عن a kind of protein called elastin protein. Elastic and collagen fibers, they allow our skin to be elastic and flexible. When somebody gets older, elasticity is lost and the collagen becomes less. That's why people, old people's skin, they become wrinkled. Wrinkled means having like folds كده, because of the loss of elasticity and drop in the amount of collagen in the dermis. But what does the dermis contain? يعني the dermis is formed of connective tissue that has a lot of elastic fibers and collagen fibers. But what are the components بقى of the dermis? Here we have the sweat gland. السويت gland يا جماعة بتبقى عاملة زي التيوب, very long tube, very long, narrow tube that is much coiled around itself, and then it extends by a sweat duct that opens on the surface of the epidermis by a sweat pore. So here is a sweat pore, which is the opening from which the sweat comes out. This is the sweat duct, and this is the sweat gland. And because we know that sweat, what is sweat يا جماعة بقى؟ What is sweat? قولي لي يا كنزي كده، احنا أخدنا excretion. Tell me what is the sweat formed of? كنت لسه بعمل ريفيجن على الريكوردينجز بتاعتكم. احنا متناقشين انا وانتي في القصه دي بس على اليورين مش على السويت. Just a second to open the chat. Water, excess salts, very good. And give me one other thing بقى. في little amount of no, الاويل مش في السويت يا عبد الرحمن. يوريا. Excellent. يوريا يا عبد الرحمن. الاويل ده لسه I'm going to explain it now. السويت يا جماعه معمول من، خليني اعمل زومينج اوت شويه كده. السويت is formed of mainly water together with excess salts and a little amount of urea. Most of the urea gets out in urine. blood يا جماعه. هو الكدني بتجيب منين الحاجات دي؟ مش من البلد. The same are the sweat glands. The sweat glands, they filter the blood, they help the kidney. They filter the blood of salts and urea, and both of them, they have to dissolve in water. This means that there must be blood capillaries reaching the sweat glands so that capillary, so the sweat can extract the wastes that dissolve in water, and the sweat is going to get out through the sweat pores. Sweat helps thermoregulation. طب how بقى? Because when the water gets out, it has to take with it part of the heat of the body. That's why when you exercise or when it is very hot, you sweat, because you need to cool your body down. You need to cool your blood. That's why the sweat is working. It gets out or filters the blood of more water dissolved in its salts and urea, of course, because when water gets out, it takes with it part of the heat of the body. And I'm going to relate the sweat glands with the blood vessels later on. Now, as I just said, blood vessels. فالبلاد vessels in all these are blood capillaries. All these هي عاملة network. طبعا هو بيبقى network more than this يعني كده. فالبلاد vessels, they are too much in the dermis, and they are not only blood capillaries, they are venules, they are arterioles, they are found here in the dermis. Also in the dermis there are nerve endings. Kenzie, are these nerve endings sensory or motor? In the ones in the skin. These are receptor cells, of course. Just a second. موتور والله بجد. تحب اشرح لكم النيرف سيستم once more. Are these motor؟ يعني لما واحد مثلا when you are pinpricked your skin runs away ولا it feels the sensation. The skin is one of the sense organs يا جماعة. One of the sense organs. يبقى طبعا بيبقى sensory. Why motor؟ مش فاهمة أنا. Thank you عبد الرحمن. Thank you. الموتور يا كنزي something يا إما muscle يا إما gland only, but not the skin. The skin is a sense organ. So nerve endings are sensory. We have nerve endings here for temperature. We have nerve endings for cold, for feeling pain. We have nerve endings for feeling touch and pressure. That's why when I was explaining this, the receptor cells, I told you the sensory receptors بتبقى most أو the receptors mostly towards the surface بتبقى those of the heat and of pain and then of pressure. You cannot feel pressure except when somebody presses on your skin, because the sensory receptors for pressure are deeper. These are towards the surface because the heat is very harmful. Will pain, if you are pinpricked, for example, this is harmful. You have to feel pain in the skin very fast. يعني sensation في temperature receptors والpain receptors بتبقى sensation فيهم faster than the pressure, because the pressure is lower than the receptors بتوعه are lower than the heat and the pain receptors. فهنا عندي receptor cells in the dermis للpain, للtemperature, للtouch, للpressure. Where these nerve endings, they help to keep us aware of any changes in the external environment زي الheat, الpain, الtouch and pressure. ما كل دي stimuli from the external environment. At the end of the dermis, or just below the dermis, there is a layer of fat cells, and these fat cells, they give me a tissue called the adipose tissue. Adipose tissue is a tissue that is formed of fat cells in the underneath, just below the dermis. يعني مفروض الدرمس لحد هنا وبس. This is a layer of adipose tissue, and the tissue here is made of cells that contain large drops of fat or like oil droplets inside these cells. And of course, this fatty tissue acts as an insulator. In order to, insulator means something that acts like a barrier against the loss of heat. يعني here I have the rest of the body just under the skin. If the body temperature is constant, as we all know, when it is cold outside, so heat is going to pass from the hot body to the outside. But because of the presence of this fat layer or the adipose tissue, this adipose tissue prevents the heat of the body from coming outside the body. That's why the skin acts in thermoregulation. The skin keeps our temperature constant because of the presence of these adipose cells or the adipose tissue, and because of other reasons that I'm going to explain later. I just said the skin is an organ. Do you want me to repeat explaining this? ولا everything is fine وبعد كده أسأل بعدين ألاقي مش حد عارف حاجة. Everything is fine ولا you want me to repeat the skin? I asked you a question. Okay. Then the skin is formed of epidermis and dermis. Epidermis, it contains a cornified layer, which is the upper layer of the epithelial cells that contain keratin, where it contains melanin cells that protects the skin from the ultraviolet rays. Also, it contains the hair follicle. And it contains it forms the hair follicle. Also, it contains the sweat pore. Dermis, it contains the sweat gland together with the sweat duct. طبعا السويت duct it opens بتطلع على الابيديرمس بالتأكيد. بيبقى فيها blood vessels. والبلاد vessels هنا they can never be arteries. تبقى arterioles which are the small arteries. بيبقى capillaries وبيبقى venules which are small veins. وبيبقى فيه كمان النيرف endings. nerve endings يعني receptor cells أو sensory receptor cells, where just below the skin بيبقى فيه الاديبوز tissue. ده السكين. أنا حابة بس أوري لكم حاجة صغيرة هنا كده ودرسناها في الاميونيتي والديزيزز. عبد الرحمن قال عليها the oily secretion. هنا we have a gland. This gland produces an oily secretion. Who remembers the name of this oily solution؟ احنا لسه دارسين بقى لسه واخدين تيست امبارح في الديزيزز والبروتكشن والحاجات دي الاميونيتي. What's the name of the oily material that is produced يا جماعه؟ What's the name of this oily material? And what's the name of this gland? لسه امبارح واخدين الكويز. Can anybody give me an answer for my question? What is this oily material called? مش اخدينها دي ولا ما خدناهاش؟ Yes, عبد الرحمن, thank you. طب what is the gland يا عبد الرحمن؟ اسمه ايه بقى؟ Excellent. برافو عليك. ايه يا جماعه، كنزي وفيرونيكا انتوا ما درستوش معانا الحاجات دي ولا ايه؟
لا دكتور can you repeat it؟ انا حاسه إن اول مره اشوفها بالنسبه لي يعني.
لا واخدينها sebaceous gland و produces an oily material و during the session قلت لكم اسمه sebum, an oily material في الباريرز موجوده في chapter 10. فالاويلي ماتيريال دهيت بتعمل طبعا soothing او بتعمل like oiling to the hair in order to come out smooth, وفي نفس الوقت الاويلي ماتيريال بيبقى فيها a chemical that kills bacteria. حبيت بس هنا اوري لكم السيبيشس جلاند لان ما كنتوش شفتوها في الديزيزز. ثانك يو يا عبد الرحمن. طيب, because the skin is an organ and it contains all these things that help in thermoregulation, that there must be a control to this skin. والcontrol هنا جاي من a part in the brain which is called the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is a part in the middle of the brain. يعني if I cut the brain lengthwise like this, if this is the brain and I cut it lengthwise, I'm going to see the hypothalamus here in an area وفي النص بالظبط بتاع البرين, وهنا في عندي البيتيوتري gland اللي هي the master gland that I mentioned before. فالhypothalamus, this is the part of the brain which is responsible for homeostasis بكل أنواعه. فدي بقول عليها ان ده this is a part of the brain that keeps the internal, لو بتكلم على temperature, it keeps the internal temperature constant. طيب بتعمل ايه بقى؟ It coordinates the activities of the body parts that can bring any changes in temperature. In other words, it acts as a thermostat. طب ايه الثيرموستات ده؟ This is something that is found in, for example, the kettle, البويلر يعني في الايرن, electric iron. When you put on or switch on the electric iron and you adjust the temperature, so it's going to heat up until the desired temperature is reached. So it's going to be switched off automatically. When the heat of the electric iron becomes cool, or it becomes cooler, so it's going to switch on by itself in order to adjust the temperature again. This is because this electric iron contains the thermostat inside. It is something or a tool to adjust the temperature or to keep the temperature of the iron constant. Here the hypothalamus is responsible for keeping our body temperature constant. لا يا عبد الرحمن, I'm going to explain now what does it do. It allows the parts of the body to keep the temperature constant. يعني it is the manager of the parts of the body responsible for keeping the body temperature constant. فالhypothalamus, it allows the organs to keep the body temperature, or it controls. That's why we call it the thermostat. It contains inside it temperature receptors. Now, if this is the hypothalamus, for example, it is a part of the body. That's why it has blood supply. Okay, inside the blood, our blood that runs inside the hypothalamus, بيبقى temperature of the blood increases or decreases. There are receptors in the hypothalamus that detect any increase or decrease in the blood running through it. فالبلد running through the blood capillaries that supply the hypothalamus with oxygen or nutrition, whatever, ده بيبقى طبعا this is blood that has a temperature. If the temperature of blood increased or decreased, there are temperature receptors in the hypothalamus to detect any change in the temperature of blood running through it, of course. If the temperature of blood is below or above 37, immediately this طبعا detect any change. If the temperature is raised or lower than 37, so the temperature receptors in the hypothalamus immediately are going to detect this change, so the hypothalamus will send impulses to the parts of the body to control the, or to regulate the body temperature. الhypothalamus contains receptors that detect any change in the temperature of the blood running through it. سواء كان this change is increase in temperature or a decrease in temperature. And when these temperature receptors detect this change, the hypothalamus immediately will send impulses to all the parts of the body responsible for regulating the temperature. Now let's take an example. If temperature falls, the first thing we do is that we shiver. So this means that the hypothalamus is going to send impulses to the muscles. So the muscles will start to shiver. طب ما هو الشيفرينج ده عبارة عن quick أو very fast contractions and relaxations that will produce heat. There is a drop in temperature. This is detected by the hypothalamus receptors. The hypothalamus will send impulses to the muscles in order to start to shiver. طبعا يا كنزي طبعا ما أنا لسه هقولها دلوقتي. فبيحصل الشيفرينج ده عبارة عن ايه؟ عبارة عن very fast contractions and relaxations that will produce heat. The heat generated is going to warm up the body, the blood طبعا that is flowing in the muscles, and blood will distribute this heat. يعني الهيت هنا هيبقى heating the blood of the muscles. So, and this blood will take the heat to all parts of the body. Okay, طيب بيحصل ايه تاني؟ الhypothalamus sends impulses to, for example, to speed up the chemical reactions اللي هي زي ما كنزي قالت metabolism increases. زي مثلا respiration increases in order to release more heat. Also, it sends impulses to the hair. طب ايه ده بقى كمان؟ طيب let me return back this picture of the hair. Just a second. لحظة يا جماعة. Somebody's Yes. Goose pimples مش bumps pimples. Just a second. ايه تاني يا جماعة؟ أنا بقفل pimples. Yes, yes, you can see. Yes. Look at this. What is this? This is the hair follicle. What is this? This is a muscle that is called erector muscle. So the hypothalamus sends impulses to this erector muscle. When it contracts, okay, the hair is going to be raised like this, how to stand up. We say that the hair stands up like this. Type. Why does the hair stand up? And these goose pimples, they يعني this is يعني طبعا not real effect يعني in humans, لكن in animals it works very good, and I'm going to tell you why now. الهير بقى بتبقى ال impulses are sent to the hair erector muscle. The word erector means standing up, to be erect. Okay, what happens is, if this is the skin and this is the hair, normally when the temperature is warm, يعني not hot and not cold, it lies like this. Here is the muscle. طبعا مش لازم ارسم بقى الابيديرمس وكده. when the muscle contracts, it shortens, so it pulls the hair like this. أو let me draw it أحسن كده, like this. Okay, طيب, what about the space that is found here between the surface of the skin and the bent or the erected hair? This is the erected hair, or we say that the hair stands up. This area is full of air, and this air is warm air. So when the hair stands up like this, the area of warm air will be more than if it is lying flat. This area is thin area. erected hair أو standing up hair أو standing up hair, it's going to trap a layer of warm air next to the skin in order to prevent the loss of warmth طبعا, because we know that air is an insulator. So it prevents the escape of heat from the inside of the body. This action is not very effective in humans because our hair is not too much. Yani I do not mean the hair of the head. I mean the hair, for example, of the skin. Even مثلا طبعا المales, men, they have thicker hair than the females, لكن برضو this is not effective. In animals بقى بيبقى they have a great amount of hair that can be very useful in this, in keeping the body temperature or in keeping the heat of the body inside. والفur, الفur is thicker and thicker and thicker hair. There are some animals that have thick hair and others that have fur. الفur like that of the bear or like that of the squirrel. But الhair بتبقى like that of the cat or dog. This is called hair. But the fur is for the fur of the animals. The fox, the bear, the squirrel, they have fur. This property for these animals helps keep the body temperature constant, يعني to be kept inside the body. لكن في humans does not have a real effect. لكن you can see that your hair is standing up, والskin بيبقى عامل goose pimples like this because the hair is standing up here. طبعا الhair, as I just said, it acts as an insulator in order to prevent the heat of the body from escaping. يبقى هنا ارجع تاني ل what the hypothalamus does. Hypothalamus كمان it sends impulses to the blood vessels, and all these are found طبعا because أو these happen because of the low temperature blood system أو the blood vessels اللي هم الارتريولز والكابيلاريز and the venules. طيب بيعمل ايه بقى؟ when the blood vessels receive the impulses, they will constrict. Veronica, what's the meaning of constrict? What's the meaning of
Constrict?
Yes, constriction. What's the meaning of constrict?
Like it kind of stops it.
Excuse me? Somehow.
It like it becomes narrower.
Yes, of course. Becomes narrower. Thank you. السباق شغال. Squeeze. لا, constriction يا عبد الرحمن is not squeezing. It is the blood vessels, they become narrower. Thank you, Kenzie. Thank you, Veronica. واللي بقول عليها vaso constriction. We have taken this word, by the way, it's one word, huh? We have taken this in the transport in animals. وخدنا الconstriction in the pupil. فالvaso constriction means that the blood vessels become narrower. طب when the blood vessels يا كنزي become narrower, will the blood inside them be more or less? When the blood vessels, they become narrower, what about the amount of blood inside? Will it be more or less? طبعا يا كنزي will be less طبعا. طب ليه بتقولي more؟ حرام عليكي. Thank you عبد الرحمن. less blood.
بعديها اتجوزت.
بالراحة شوية، جاوبي بالراحة بالراحة. فكري وجاوبي، بس don't think يعني too much، لأن هي ما فيهاش حاجة. a narrow vessel then its blood will be less. طيب لما يحصل
ساعتها بتكون في more blood، مش احيانا بتبقى flow faster.
ايه ده؟
احيانا مش تقريبا خدناها اظن المره اللي فاتت تقريبا when the blood vessel constricts تقريبا
لا
more
ده
blood
البلاد
flow.
بريشر، بلاد بريشر بيبقى اعلى، لكن في انت عندك النارو تيوب هيبقى فيها بلاد قليل غير لما يبقى فيه وايد تيوب. يبقى الاماونت، ما قلتش البريشر، الاماونت. في فرق بين الاماونت والبريشر. اوكي، الاماونت will be less. وطبعا هنا يبقى البريشر طبعا عالي اكتر، لان because it is a narrow blood vessel. طيب
اوكي،
تعالوا بقى نشوف ايه اللي بيحصل في البلاد فيسلز exactly. Let me put this picture بقى، لان ايه ما ينفعش without a picture. ثواني اهي، هنا حاطين كله بقى. I think you can see the picture now. بصوا يا جماعه، انا هنا بتكلم when it gets too cold. اوكي اهو الهير stands up. بصوا الماسلز اهي they contracted بتاعت الهير. بصوا بقى هنا في البلد دي طبعا السويت جلانز ماليش دعوه بيها. ده كده an arteriole, capillary and a venule نازل من هنا. We have something here between the arteriole and the venule that is called a shunt. يعني أنا أحب أرسمها لأن picture دي مش عارفة ليه بيرسموا غلط. let me get you this picture أحسن. كانت في النوتس القديمة بتاعتي دي أحسن كتير. Look at this. هرجع لكم البيكتشر بتاعت البوك تاني، لأن طبعا لما يبقى في إكزام هيجيب لك الصورة من البوك. This is an arteriole. Okay, this is the capillary and the venule. لو ملاحظين ان there is another pathway for the blood between the arteriole والvenule immediately. طبعا كان المفروض يلونها لنا بلو بس لا مش ملونه. There is another pathway. طيب لما يكون too cold, when it is cold, we need less blood to reach the surface لأن ده surface of the skin. So if there is more blood here يبقى ال temperature أو ال body heat is going to be lost. لكن when the capillary narrows أو يحصل constriction, vasoconstriction, ال vasoconstriction على فكرة بيبقى هنا في المنطقة دي كده. ف less blood is going to enter the capillaries. طب بقية البلاد هيروح فين؟ It's going to pass through this shunt. يعني less blood will be moving in the capillaries. طب what about the rest of the blood? It's going to pass. طب هتقولوا لي طب why the blood does not pass through the shunt always؟ لأن هنا بيبقى فيه a muscle that is controlling the opening and closure of this shunt. في الحتة دي كده. This is a muscle. when it is cold, this muscle relaxes. So the shunt is going to open. عشان في less blood moving through the capillaries. What about the rest of the blood that is brought to the skin? هيبدأ يعدي in the shunt. يبقى I am decreasing the amount of blood near to the air أو skin surface. هنا في air طبعا. In order will that بيبقى cold air. In order to prevent the heat loss from the blood, فأنا بقلل ال amount of blood as much as possible and allowing the blood to move through the shunt vessels that are deep inside the skin, أو deeper than the capillaries inside the skin. فطبعا the blood will not lose too much heat لأن الشانت بيبقى deeper than the capillaries. وعلى فكرة هنا بيبقى عندي الشانت is just beneath the adipose tissue. الاديبوز tissue أفكركم تاني اللي هي the layer of fat in the lowermost part of the skin أو just below the dermis. فهنا عندي ده الشانت. shunt means a connection. فالconnection دي بتبقى just below the adipose layer. That's why the blood does not lose heat. وطبعا بيبقى we do not have to forget ال hair وال erector pili muscle أو ال erector muscles that become contracted to trap an area of moist air. In order وكمان ال moist air is an insulator. It's not allowing the heat of the body to exit out. طيب the opposite بقى when the temperature rises. طيب أنا عايزة بقى أنتوا اللي هتقولوا لي what will happen when the temperature rises. Let me remind you, when the temperature falls, the hypothalamus will send impulses to the erector muscles of the hair so the hair stands up. ثانية واحدة. impulses will reach the blood vessels يحصل vasoconstriction. طيب تعالوا بقى نشوف كده. This is an answer. The hair stays flat. كويس قوي يا كنزي. طيب can you tell me why?
Because the erector muscle will relax
Yes, of course. يبقى في relaxation of the erector muscle. So the hair lies flat. طيب it will trap a wide area of moist air ولا a narrow area يا كنزي؟
دكتور can you repeat بس عشان الصوت بيقطع؟
ما هي انا عشان كده سكت. لما الhair lies flat will it trap a wide area of air or not او a narrow area of air؟ يعني لما كان عامل كده الاريا اوف اير was more ولا less؟ مش عارفه انت سامعاني او لا يا كنزي. It seems you cannot hear me. طيب and now is it okay؟ في حد خرج. كنزي خرجت. هي كنزي مش موجودة معانا أصلا. خرجت. she returned back. هو أنا كان عندي الإنترنت yes it was الكونكشن كان مش كويس بس هي كان عند كنزي كمان. كنزي can you hear me now؟
ايوه دكتور كده سامع حضرتك.
اوكي بصي بقى انت قلتي ان في relaxation للإيركتور muscle فالhair lies flat. What about the area of air that is trapped? Will it be a narrow area او a little amount of air ولا a great amount of air؟
little عشان مش هيكون في
little طبعا يبقى and I said that because the air acts as an insulator يبقى هنا ال insulating material will be less so the heat is going to escape أو there is no barrier بقى to the escape of heat. طيب كنزي كلمتنا على الهير. عبد الرحمن what happens to the blood vessels؟ What happens to the blood vessels بقى؟ They will dilate. Very good. وما دام dilation of blood vessels هقول ايه بقى؟ Vasodilation. طب what about the shunt يا عبد الرحمن؟ Will it close or it's still open؟ The shunt. أو is it dilated خد بالك الشنت is open عشان يعدي لي البلاد like this. It is narrow. اهي. Okay, yes, of course, becomes narrow. Thank you, Veronica. عبد الرحمن, thank you. So the blood will يعني خلي more blood to enter الcapillaries so heat is lost by radiation. وخلينا فاكرين دايما ان the shunt is found below الادipose tissue. عشان كده اي blood capillary above the adipose tissue يبقى it's easy to lose heat from. That's why we decreased here the amount of air, but here the amount of air of blood is going to increase more to allow much heat to be lost. طيب في another thing بقى يعني in the low temperature كان عندي اتكلمت على الهير وعلى البلاد capillaries and shivering of muscles. هنا بقى ما فيش shivering. مين يقول لي يبقى فيه ايه؟ number 3 when there is too much heat what happens in the skin؟ sweat. طبعا thank you. لأن I just said that the sweat هيبقى increased كمان. I just said when the sweat comes out water takes the heat inside the body in order to evaporate with it. Because we know that evaporation means heating water till it becomes a vapor. Even without seeing your sweat فبتبقى الsweat glands are working and water is evaporated. That's why you cannot see even if you are at rest. بيبقى في evaporation of water from of the sweat by using the heat of the body. Here there is increased sweating طبعا in order to decrease the heat of the body by allowing the heat to be used in evaporating الsweat. طيب تعالوا بقى أرجع تاني البيكتشر of the book عشان لو جالنا فيها question you will know how to answer it. When it gets cool يبقى pili or erector muscles they are going to contract, so the hair stands up and trap an area of insulating warm air in between it and the skin. بلاقي ان vasoconstriction with opening of the shunt. طبعا هنا ده مش مرسوم صح خالص. وبيحصل shivering. When it gets too hot يبقى muscles they are going to relax, so the hair will lie flat to decrease the air which is trapped between the hair and the skin. وبلاقي ان يحصل vasodilation to allow more blood and the shunt become narrower to allow more blood to go through the capillaries nearer to the skin, so the heat is lost. Also, the sweat glands, they are going to work more in order to consume an amount of heat of the body to evaporate the sweat from the surface of the skin. عشان كده بيحصل لنا cooling down. طيب. All these are controlled by the hypothalamus. طيب. How does it work بقى? It works by a certain mechanism called the feedback mechanism. وخلوني أحط هنا another word, negative. feedback mechanism. ليه أنا حطيت النيجاتيف في الآخر؟ هو لما تكبروا بقى في A2 you're going to know that there is another thing called positive feedback mechanism. بس دي مش علينا خالص. Even in A2 بيقولوها لهم كده in a paragraph وخلاص. طيب ده معناه ايه؟ معناه ان when طبعا احنا بنتكلم على ال thermoregulation اللي هي regulation of the temperature. هنا بيبقى when the temperature of the blood rises, blood temperature increases, بيحصل ايه؟ ان الhypothalamus is going to detect this and respond by sending nerve impulses to the skin in order to bring about action in order to cool the body أو cool the blood. لأن ال temperature of the body يا جماعة بتتاخد من ال blood. طيب on the other hand when the cooler blood reaches the hypothalamus, so the receptors in the hypothalamus will sense this drop in temperature, so it will send nerve impulses to the skin again to take the actions to reduce the rate at which reduce the heat loss. This means that it will keep the temperature normal أو at a constant level أو its normal level. طيب وفي نفس الوقت بيحصل كمان more metabolism. To keep the temperature normal. طيب why did they call it negative feedback؟ اولا what's the meaning of feedback؟ لما كده حد is doing something واعمل feedback للparent. If somebody is not studying well and I give a feedback to the parent هي خدتوا بالكم response. اضحكي مطمنه انت مش كده يا كنسي؟
لا والله.
لا انا مقدره ظروفك انت، ربنا يكون في عونك اليومين اللي فاتوا، ربنا يكون في عونك فعلا. ده انا كنت محروق دمي، امال انت بقى. بس كويس جت مصلحه. الحمد لله. اصل يا جماعه كنزي كانت عايشه في ازمه، ربنا ما يوريش حد يعني الايام اللي فاتت بسبب النتيجه والكلام ده يعني.
ايوه
عشان ما نبقاش بنتكلم بالالغاز والناس مش فاهمه يعني. فبس هنقفل على كده، الحمد لله كل حاجه اتظبطت الحمد لله. بصوا بقى يعني ايه فيدباك؟ عبد الرحمن قال لي ريسبونس، بس هنا في نقطه يا عبد الرحمن، ان when the hypothalamus made the skin to take action to increase the heat loss مثلا، في information about the effect of these actions بتبقى fed back to the hypothalamus. يعني مثلا الهايبوثالاموس عطت information او impulses to the skin، لازم يوصل a feedback to the hypothalamus again ان everything is okay. يبقى الفيدباك ده لازم something that reaches او an information that reaches the hypothalamus، فتبدا الهايبوثالاموس to feel a sense in the drop of the temperature، تقول الله لا لازم اوقف السكين هنا، يعني the skin is not going to lose temperature forever، لا it has to stop. فهنا اللي بقول عليها النيجاتيف، ان الهايبوثالاموس at the beginning gave the skin positive information، بلاش positive عشان ما تتلخبطوش، الهايبوثالاموس sends impulses to the skin in order to lose الهيت. sorry when it becomes hot. طيب هل السكين is going to lose the heat forever؟ لا، ده أول ما يحصل cooling down of the body خلاص الانفورميشن will be fed back to the hypothalamus. hypothalamus هتبدأ تقول للسكين stop by stopping impulses، فتبتدي تعمل negative effect عن اللي كانت بتعمله في الأول. it is called the feedback because the information من السكين must be fed to the hypothalamus in order that senses. طبعا الانفورميشن دي جايه عن طريق مين؟ عن طريق البلاد، لان الهايبوثالاموس بتعمل sensing to the temperature of the blood. لو كان very hot so it will send impulses to the skin، فالسكين طبعا هو controlled، فلو جايه له impulses to lose heat هيفضل يعمل losing heat ايه لحد ما نتجمد؟ لا، until the blood temperature drops فالهايبوثالاموس تقول لها stop بقى كفايه. طيب الكفايه دي عن طريق ايه؟ it will decrease the impulses to the skin. بدل ما كانت قاعده to send more and more impulses it's going to drop the amount of impulses to the skin. فالinformation that the blood has cooled down stops the hypothalamus from making the skin to do this action أو from ordering the skin to do the actions. طيب ودي بسميها a negative feedback. وعلى فكرة كل الهوميوستاسيس دي feedback mechanisms، بس everyone طبعا رايح لحاجة. يعني we are now speaking about thermoregulation or adjusting the temperature of the body. فعشان كده بتكلم بس على الهيت. لكن for adjusting الووتر والجلوكوز ليفل كله فيدباك ميكانيزمز برضه. فلو حبيت احط البيكتشر دي for the feedback اهي. look at this. انا هنا عندي الهايبوثالاموس اهي، داخلها طبعا السكين ريسبتورز felt او received الكولد sensation. اوكي، فالبلاد became cold. فالhypothalamus has receptors that will sense that the blood temperature dropped. هتبدأ تعمل الميكانيزم of gaining أو saving heat عن طريق إيه؟ أهم respiration increases أو in other words الميتابوليزم، لأن we have taken before and the respiration is one of the metabolic reactions. where the muscles they are going to work يعني to shiver. where the hair stands up will surface blood vessels constrict. contract يعني constrict. وطبعا ان ده هيعمل drop in the amount of blood near to the skin، يبقى it will lose less heat where the blood will be shifted to the shunt أو the shunt will open. خليني أحطها هي كمان to decrease the amount of blood to the surface of the skin. فبكده the body is going to gain its heat وتبدأ هنا السكين is going to be to become hotter. على طول the blood will be طبعا هنا too hot دي لو كان ال weather is very hot هيبدأ ال blood to become hot, so the hypothalamus will detect this heat or heating of blood by its receptors, will send impulses to the organs in order to lose heat. الorgans دي اللي هي طبعا الميتابوليزم will slow down, the hair will lie flat, the blood vessels will dilate. خليني احط the shunt narrows. It does not close completely على فكرة, it becomes narrower يعني, ويحصل كمان sweating, so the body will lose heat ويرجع تاني and so on. العملية دي بقول عليها the negative feedback، لأن كل ما الهايبوثالاموس بتدي impulses ترجع تغيرها مرة تانية، يعني تغيرها تاني according to the information coming by the blood to the hypothalamus.